I stood at the gates of what should have been the happiest day of my life, and a man in a cheap polyester uniform looked me up and down like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. That's where this story begins. But to understand how I got there, to that moment of humiliation that would change everything, you need to know who I was before that day, and who I became after. My name is Dorothy Mitchell. I'm 63 years old now, though some days I feel ancient, and other days I feel like I'm just beginning to understand what it means to be alive. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world, drop a comment and let me know where you are. I want to know that my story reaches beyond these walls I've built around myself. And if you've ever felt invisible, dismissed, or looked down upon by people who should have loved you, then this story is for you. Check the description box below for more stories like this one, stories about people like us who refuse to stay silent. The day I'm about to tell you about happened 3 years ago, but it's taken me this long to be able to speak about it without my hands shaking. Even now, as I record these words, I can feel my pulse quickening. Memory is a strange thing. It preserves not just what happened, but how it felt, the texture of humiliation, the metallic taste of betrayal, the cold weight of rage settling in your chest like a stone. Let me take you back further, though. Back to before the wedding. Back to when I still believed that love and sacrifice would be enough. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you knew it yourself. My father worked at the steel mill for 40 years until it closed, and my mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families on the hill. I learned early that the world was divided into two kinds of people: those who were served, and those who served. I promised myself I would never be the latter. I was 22 when I met Robert Mitchell. He was handsome in that clean-cut, all-American way, sandy hair, broad shoulders, a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He worked in his father's construction business, and he had plans. Big plans. He was going to expand the company, build subdivisions, shopping centers, maybe even high-rises. He painted pictures of our future with such confidence that I couldn't help but believe him. We married 6 months after we met. I wore my mother's wedding dress, altered to fit my smaller frame. Robert's parents weren't thrilled about the match. I came from the wrong side of town, didn't have a college degree, didn't fit their vision of who their son should marry. But Robert insisted. And back then, I thought that meant something. I thought love conquered all those petty class distinctions. Our son, Christopher, was born 11 months after the wedding. The moment they placed him in my arms, still red and screaming, I felt something shift in the very foundation of who I was. I had never loved anything the way I loved that child. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine with such trust, such absolute faith that I would protect him, provide for him, never let him down. I made promises to him in those first moments, silent vows that I would give him everything I never had. Robert's construction business struggled those first few years. His father had died suddenly, leaving debts Robert hadn't known about. We lived in a small apartment above a pizza shop, and some months we had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying formula. I took a job as a secretary at a law firm downtown, typing legal documents until my fingers cramped, learning the language of contracts and property law. I was good at it. Better than good. The lawyers started asking for me specifically, trusting me with more complex work. I learned how to read between the lines of legal documents, how to spot problems before they became disasters. One of the senior partners, Gerald Hoffman, took me under his wing. He was a gruff man in his 60s, brilliant and demanding, and he saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. "You're wasting your talent typing other people's words," he told me one evening when everyone else had gone home. "You should be going to law school." I laughed. With what money? With what time? I have a baby at home and a husband who can barely keep his business afloat. Gerald looked at me with those sharp blue eyes. Then find a different path. Real estate. Property management. You have a mind for it, and you don't need a law degree to build an empire. An empire. The word sounded absurd coming from someone like me, someone who'd grown up watching her mother scrub other people's toilets. But the seed was planted. I started small. I saved every penny I could from my secretary's salary. I read every book I could find about real estate investing, property law, commercial development. While Robert worked long hours trying to save his construction business, I put Christopher to bed and studied late into the night. I learned about zoning laws, tax liens, foreclosures, investment strategies. When Christopher was 3, I found my first deal. A small duplex in a neighborhood that was run down but showed signs of gentrification. The owner was elderly and desperate to sell. I didn't have enough for a down payment, but Gerald co-signed the loan. Robert thought I was crazy, taking on debt when we were already struggling, but something in me knew this was right. I fixed up that duplex myself. I learned how to paint, how to replace faucets, how to negotiate with contractors. I rented both units for more than double the mortgage payment. Within a year, I bought another property, then another. Robert's construction business failed when Christopher was 5. I remember the night he came home and told me, his face grey, his hands shaking. He'd lost everything his father had built. I held him while he cried, and I didn't tell him that I'd seen it coming for months. I didn't tell him that I'd been preparing for this, building something separate, something that couldn't fail because it was built on my own sweat and stubbornness. "We'll be okay," I told him. "I've got us covered." That was the beginning of the shift in our marriage. Robert couldn't handle being supported by his wife. It ate at him, this blow to his masculine pride. He withdrew, became sullen and critical. He started drinking. Not a lot at first, just a beer or two after dinner. But it grew. The drinking grew, and the distance between us grew, and Christopher grew up watching his father become smaller and his mother become harder. I threw myself into my work. By the time Christopher was 10, I owned 8 rental properties. By the time he was 15, I'd moved into commercial real estate, small strip malls, office buildings. I was ruthless in negotiations, tireless in my pursuit of the next deal. People in the industry started to know my name. Dorothy Mitchell. That woman who came from nothing and built something substantial. But success came at a cost. I missed Christopher's school plays because I was closing deals. I forgot his birthday one year because I was negotiating a complex acquisition. Robert and I barely spoke anymore. We were roommates sharing space, nothing more. Christopher became quiet, withdrawn. He spent more time at his friends' houses than at home. I told myself it was all for him. Everything I built, I was building for Christopher's future. He would have opportunities one never had. He would go to the best schools, have the best of everything. He would never know what it felt like to be looked down upon because of where he came from. When Christopher was 17, Robert moved out. There was no big fight, no dramatic confrontation. He just packed his things one Saturday morning while Christopher was at a friend's house, and left. I came home from a property inspection to find a note on the kitchen counter: "I can't do this anymore. I'll always love who you used to be." I should have felt something. Sadness, anger, relief. Instead, I felt nothing. Our marriage had been dead for years. This was just the official burial. I signed the divorce papers without a lawyer, gave him a fair settlement even though I didn't have to. He moved to Florida, started a small handyman business, sent Christopher birthday cards with $20 bills inside. Christopher went to Cornell. I paid for everything: tuition, room and board, spending money. He studied business, joined a fraternity, came home less and less. When he did come home, he seemed like a stranger. He wore expensive clothes, spoke differently, had friends with names like Winchester and Pemberton. He was becoming the kind of person I'd worked so hard for him to be, and somehow that meant he was leaving me behind. By the time Christopher graduated, I owned a portfolio worth over $40 million. I had apartment complexes, office buildings, a small hotel downtown. I'd built an empire, just like Gerald had said I could. But I'd built it alone, and my son barely knew who I was anymore. Christopher moved to the city after college, took a job at an investment firm. He'd call once a month, our conversations stilted and brief. "How are you, Mom?" "Fine. And you?" "Fine." Long pauses filled with everything we weren't saying. I wanted to ask him about his life, his dreams, his heart, but I didn't know how. I'd spent so many years being tough, being strategic, being the one who solved problems instead of talking about feelings. Then, 2 years ago, Christopher called with news. He'd met someone. Her name was Victoria Ashford, and she was the daughter of Richard Ashford. Yes, that Richard Ashford, the real estate developer whose face appeared on billboards across 3 states. They'd been dating for 6 months, and it was serious. "I'd like you to meet her," Christopher said, and I could hear both hope and apprehension in his voice. "Of course," I said. "I'd love to meet her." But when he told me he wanted to bring her to my house, I felt a familiar anxiety. My house was nice, a comfortable colonial in a good neighborhood, but it wasn't mansion nice. It wasn't Ashford nice. Would this girl judge me? Would she look around my home and find it wanting? Would she look at me and see what Robert's parents had seen all those years ago, someone not quite good enough? I pushed those thoughts away. I was Dorothy Mitchell. I'd built a real estate empire from nothing. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. The first meeting was pleasant enough. Victoria was beautiful in that polished, expensive way, blonde hair that moved in shiny waves, perfect teeth, clothes that whispered money rather than shouted it. She was polite, called me Mrs. Mitchell even when I insisted on Dorothy, complimented my home in a way that felt rehearsed. "Christopher speaks so highly of you," she said, smiling that perfect smile. "He says you're an incredibly successful businesswoman." "I've done well," I said modestly. "She built her portfolio from scratch," Christopher added, and I heard pride in his voice. It warmed something in me that had been cold for a long time. But Victoria's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "How impressive. My father always says real estate is such a practical field." Practical. The word hung in the air like a subtle insult. Not prestigious. Not elegant. Practical. The evening continued with pleasant small talk. Victoria told stories about her charity work, her volunteer positions on various boards. She mentioned her family's vacation home in the Hamptons, their apartment in Manhattan, her father's latest development project, a luxury high-rise that would be an absolute architectural marvel. When they left, Christopher hugged me. "Thanks, Mom. I know she seemed a little formal, but she's just nervous. She really wants you to like her." "She seems lovely," I lied. Over the following months, I saw Christopher even less. He was absorbed in Victoria's world, attending galas, charity auctions, society events. He was becoming the kind of man who belonged in that world, shedding the last traces of his upbringing like an old skin that no longer fit. 18 months ago, Christopher called with more news. He and Victoria were getting married. They'd already booked the venue, some exclusive estate on the Hudson River. Victoria's parents were handling most of the planning. It was going to be a large wedding, very formal. Did I have a dress? Did I know what color to wear? Victoria's mother would be calling with details. Victoria's mother. Patricia Ashford. She called 2 days later, and I understood immediately why Victoria wore that practice smile. Patricia had perfected it first. "Dorothy, how lovely to finally speak with you. Christopher is such a charming young man. We're absolutely thrilled to welcome him into our family." Not our families. Just hers. She went on to explain the wedding plans in excruciating detail. The color scheme, the flowers, the 6-course menu. Everything had been decided. My input wasn't requested. I was simply being informed. "Of course, we'll need to discuss the financial arrangements," Patricia said, her voice taking on a delicate tone. "Traditionally, the bride's family handles the majority of the expenses, but we thought it would be appropriate for Christopher's family to contribute something. Perhaps you could cover the rehearsal dinner? Something modest would be fine." Something modest. Another subtle dig. My contribution should be small, insignificant, appropriate to my station. I wanted to tell her that I could buy her precious venue 10 times over. I wanted to tell her about my empire, my success, everything I'd built. But something stopped me. Pride. Maybe. Or the memory of being young and dismissed by Robert's parents. I'd learned long ago that you didn't prove yourself by bragging. You proved yourself by letting your actions speak. The rehearsal dinner. "Of course," I said simply. Over the following months, I was kept at arm's length from the wedding planning. Decisions were made without my input. The guest list barely included anyone from my side, just a handful of distant relatives and old friends I wasn't even sure would come. Victoria and Patricia were orchestrating everything, and I was just expected to show up, write checks, and smile. Christopher became distant again. Our monthly phone calls dropped to every few months. When I did speak to him, Victoria was always there, her voice a cheerful soundtrack in the background. He started sentences with "Victoria thinks" and "Victoria says" and "Victoria wants." My son was disappearing into someone else's vision of who he should be. 3 months before the wedding, I received a call from Patricia. She wanted to clarify a few things about my role in the ceremony. She wanted to make sure I knew where I would be seated, not in the front row with the Ashfords, but in the 3rd row, to make room for Victoria's extended family. She wanted to confirm that I understood the dress code, elegant but understated. We wouldn't want anyone to outshine the bride. She wanted to remind me that photos would be taken in a specific order, and I should wait for direction from the photographer. Each instruction felt like a small humiliation, a reminder that I was peripheral to this event, tolerated rather than celebrated. I was the mother of the groom, but I was being treated like a distant relative, someone whose presence was obligatory but not particularly desired. I said nothing. I agreed to everything. But something was building inside me, a cold, calculating anger that I recognized from my business dealings. It was the feeling I got when someone tried to cheat me on a deal, when someone underestimated me because I was a woman or because I came from nothing. It was the feeling that made me dangerous. The venue they'd chosen was called Riverside Manor. I looked it up online and found a sprawling estate with manicured gardens, a historic mansion, and sweeping views of the Hudson. The website boasted about its exclusivity, its prestigious clientele, its place among the premier wedding venues in the state. Starting prices for events began at $50,000. I knew Riverside Manor. I knew it very well. But they didn't know that I knew it. And that was about to become very, very important. 23 years ago, before Christopher went to college, before my portfolio reached 8 figures, before I became the Dorothy Mitchell that people in real estate circles whispered about, I made an acquisition that would change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to how it happened. It was a Wednesday in October. I remember because Christopher had a chemistry test that day, and I'd quizzed him on organic compounds over breakfast. He was 14, gangly and awkward, his voice cracking when he got excited about something. Robert had already checked out of our marriage by then, spending more time at bars than at home, but we were still maintaining the fiction of a family. I'd been working with a property scout named Tom Brennan, a man in his 60s who'd forgotten more about real estate than most people would ever know. Tom had survived the market crashes, the boom and bust cycles, by having an instinct for properties that others overlooked. He called me that Wednesday morning, his voice buzzing with suppressed excitement. "Dorothy, I've got something. But you need to move fast, and you need to trust me." Tom knew I didn't make moves without research, without running numbers, without analyzing every angle. But he also knew I respected his judgment. "Tell me." Riverside Estate. The old Montgomery property on the Hudson. I knew it immediately. Everyone in the area knew the Montgomery estate. It had been built in the 1920s by railroad money, a sprawling mansion with formal gardens, a ballroom, 50 acres of pristine riverfront land. The Montgomery family had fallen on hard times in the 70s, tried to turn it into a hotel but failed, tried to subdivide the land but got tangled in zoning restrictions. For the past 20 years, it had sat mostly empty, slowly deteriorating, a monument to faded grandeur. What about it? The estate's in foreclosure. The bank wants to unload it fast. They're tired of maintaining it, tired of the liability. They're willing to sell for a fraction of what it's worth, but there are complications. Major renovations needed. Zoning issues. Easement disputes with neighboring properties. It's a mess, Dorothy. But if someone could untangle it all. How much? Tom named a figure that made my breath catch. It was more money than I'd ever spent on a single property, more than my entire portfolio was worth at that time. It would require taking on significant debt, risking everything I'd built. If I was wrong, if I couldn't make it work, I could lose it all. "I can't spend that kind of money on a property I can't use," I said. "That's the thing," Tom said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I've been doing research. The zoning issues? They're resolvable. The easement disputes? They're based on outdated surveys. The renovations? Extensive, but the bones of the place are solid. Dorothy, if you can acquire this property and hold it for 5, maybe 10 years, it'll be worth 10 times what you pay for it. Maybe more. The area's gentrifying. The riverfront is getting developed. This property is going to be in the center of it all." I thought about my savings, my cash flow, my risk tolerance. I thought about Christopher's college fund, about having enough cushion to weather a bad year. I thought about playing it safe versus taking a calculated gamble that could change everything. "I need to see it," I said. That afternoon, I drove out to Riverside Estate with Tom. The property took my breath away. Yes, it was run down, broken windows, overgrown gardens, paint peeling from the mansion's facade. But underneath the decay, I could see what it had been and what it could be again. The bones were good, like Tom had said. The location was perfect. The river views were stunning. This wasn't just a property. It was a vision waiting for someone to believe in it. We walked through the mansion, our footsteps echoing in empty rooms. The ballroom had a collapsed ceiling, water damage from a roof leak. The kitchen was a 1970s nightmare of avocado green and harvest gold. The bathrooms needed to be gutted. But the woodwork was original oak, the windows were leaded glass, the fireplaces were marble. Quality like that couldn't be replicated, only restored. What would you do with it? Tom asked. I stood in the middle of the ballroom, looking up at the damaged ceiling, and I could see it all at once. Not a hotel. Not subdivided lots. Something else. An events venue. Weddings, corporate retreats, galas. There was a market for that, a market that was only going to grow as the area developed. People wanted places with history, with character, with views like these. They would pay premium prices for the right to celebrate their important moments in a place like this. I'll take it, I said. Tom whistled low. You sure? This is going to take everything you've got, Dorothy. And then some. I'm sure. The acquisition process took 3 months. I had to take out loans against my other properties, had to convince skeptical bankers that I could make this work. I worked with lawyers to resolve the zoning issues, surveyors to settle the easement disputes, engineers to assess what renovations were critical versus cosmetic. I maxed out every line of credit, called in every favor, worked 18-hour days. Robert thought I'd lost my mind. You're going to bankrupt us over some rundown mansion? What the hell are you thinking? But I wasn't asking his permission. I was informing him of what I was doing. Our marriage was already over in everything but paperwork. This property was mine, my vision, my risk to take. I closed on Riverside Estate in January. Standing in that damaged ballroom with the deed in my hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope mixed with terror, the exhilaration of having bet everything on one hand. The renovations took 5 years. 5 years of permit battles, contractor disputes, cost overruns, and moments when I woke up at 3 in the morning sure I'd made a terrible mistake. I had to prioritize what to fix first, what could wait. I started with structural issues, roof, foundation, electrical, plumbing. Then the cosmetic work, restoring the woodwork, refinishing floors, bringing the ballroom back to its former glory. I did much of the work myself. I couldn't afford not to. I learned how to refinish wood floors, how to restore plaster walls, how to negotiate with historical preservation societies. My hands were always covered in cuts and calluses. My back ached constantly. I was 43 years old and putting in the physical labor of a woman half my age. Christopher was in college by then, far away and absorbed in his own life. Robert was in Florida, a distant memory. I was alone with this massive project that consumed every moment of every day. Some nights I slept on a cot in what would eventually become the bridal suite, too tired to drive home. But slowly, impossibly, it came together. The ballroom was restored to its 1920s glory, chandelier rewired and sparkling, ceiling repaired and painted, French doors leading out to gardens that I'd replanted myself. I converted the upstairs bedrooms into luxurious bridal and groom suites. I turned the old servants' quarters into offices and storage. I built a commercial kitchen that could handle events for 300 people. I hired a small staff, a manager, an events coordinator, maintenance crew. I invested in marketing, created a website, started booking events. The first wedding at Riverside Manor happened 7 years after I'd acquired the property. It was a modest affair, a young couple with a limited budget who were willing to take a chance on a venue that didn't have much of a track record yet. I watched that bride walk down the aisle in my ballroom, and I cried. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it proved that my vision had been right. This place could be what I'd dreamed it could be. Word spread slowly at first, then faster. Riverside Manor became known as the premier venue in the region. We were booked 2 years in advance. Wealthy families fought for dates. We could charge premium prices and people paid gladly because the property, the service, the attention to detail were worth it. I never advertised how much the property was worth. I never boasted about owning it. In business circles, people knew I owned Riverside Manor, but outside that world, it was just another property in my portfolio. I'd learned long ago that real wealth was quiet, that true power didn't need to announce itself. Christopher never asked much about my business. When he came home for holidays, we'd have those stilted conversations. How's work? Fine. How's your mother? She's well. But he never inquired about the details of what I did. He knew I owned properties, knew I was successful, but he didn't know the scope of it. And I didn't tell him. Why would I? He seemed embarrassed by the whole idea of his mother working, much less working in real estate. When Christopher announced his engagement to Victoria and told me they'd booked Riverside Manor, my first reaction was shock. My second was a cold calculation of what this meant. He didn't know. He had no idea I owned the venue. Victoria and her parents certainly didn't know. They'd gone through my events coordinator, booked the date, put down a deposit. My name wasn't on any of the paperwork they would have seen. That all went through the business entity I'd set up for tax purposes. To them, Riverside Manor was just an exclusive venue, probably owned by some corporation or investment group. I could have told Christopher immediately, "Son, I own that venue. I've owned it for 2 decades. Let me make sure everything is perfect for you." But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Victoria had said practical when describing my work. Maybe it was Patricia Ashford's assumption that my contribution should be modest. Maybe it was the accumulation of all those small slights, all those reminders that I wasn't quite good enough for their world. Or maybe it was something deeper, a desire to see how I would be treated when they didn't know who I was. Would they extend courtesy and respect to the groom's mother regardless of what they thought of her status? Or would their true colors show? I decided to wait. I decided to watch. And I instructed my events coordinator, Margaret, to handle everything normally, without mentioning my ownership. If you've ever wanted to test people's true character, put yourself in a position where they don't think you have power. You'll learn everything you need to know. Margaret was confused by my instructions. "But Mrs. Mitchell, don't you want to be involved in your own son's wedding planning?" "I'll be involved," I assured her. "Just not in the way they expect." Over the following months, I watched from a distance as Victoria and Patricia planned Christopher's wedding at my venue. I received reports from Margaret about their demands, their changes, their attitudes toward my staff. They were exactly as entitled as I'd expected, treating my employees like servants, making last-minute changes that created extra work, complaining about costs while demanding upgrades. Patricia Ashford called Margaret directly once, 3 months before the wedding, with a special request. "We'd like to make some modifications to the ballroom layout. And we'll need to bring in our own decorator. I'm sure you understand that for a wedding of this caliber, we need someone with a more refined aesthetic." Margaret, bless her, maintained perfect professionalism. "Of course, Mrs. Ashford. However, any structural modifications will need to be approved by the property owner, and outside decorators need to be insured and approved as well. It's in your contract." "The property owner?" Patricia's voice dripped with dismissiveness. "Surely for an event of this importance, they can make an exception." "I'll pass along your request," Margaret said neutrally. I denied the modifications and the outside decorator. Through Margaret, I sent a polite but firm message. The venue would be used as specified in the contract. No exceptions. Margaret told me Patricia had been furious, had threatened to take their business elsewhere, until Margaret reminded her that they'd signed a contract and forfeited their deposit if they cancelled. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt sad. My son was marrying into a family that believed rules didn't apply to them, that their money and status meant they could bulldoze over everyone else. Christopher called me a week after that incident. "Mom, Victoria's mom is really stressed about the wedding planning. The venue is being really difficult about letting them make some changes. Could you maybe, I don't know, talk to someone? Call the venue or something?" "Christopher, they signed a contract. Venues have rules for a reason." "I know, but..." He sighed. "It's just causing a lot of tension. Victoria's upset. Her mom is upset. I'm caught in the middle. So you want me to fix it?" I kept my voice gentle, but I felt a familiar frustration. When had Christopher started expecting other people to solve his problems? "Could you just try?" I wanted to tell him the truth right then. I wanted to say, "Christopher, I own that venue. I created every rule in that contract for good reasons. Those rules protect the property and ensure every event runs smoothly. Your future in-laws are demanding special treatment because they think the rules don't apply to them." But I didn't. Instead, I said, "I'll see what I can do." I called Margaret and instructed her to hold firm. No modifications. No exceptions. The contract stood. If you've ever been in a position where your own child doesn't recognize your value, doesn't see what you've built, doesn't understand who you really are, then you know the particular pain I felt in those moments. I'd built an empire so Christopher could have every opportunity, and he didn't even know the empire existed. He saw me as his mother who owned some properties, nothing more. The final straw came 2 months before the wedding. Patricia called me directly, not Margaret, me. She'd somehow gotten my personal number, probably from Christopher. Dorothy, we need to discuss the wedding day arrangements. Specifically, your arrival and your role in the ceremony. My role. I felt ice forming in my chest. Yes. We've been thinking it would be best if you arrived slightly before the ceremony begins, entered through the side door so you don't get caught up in the main guest arrivals, and took your seat quietly. We want to keep the focus on Victoria and Christopher, and we wouldn't want any distractions. Distractions. She meant me. I would be a distraction. And the photographs? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Oh, of course you'll be in the family photos. We'll make sure to include you in a few. But the primary photos will be the Ashford family with the bride and groom. We have a very specific vision for the wedding album, and we need to keep things cohesive. Cohesive. Another way of saying I didn't fit their aesthetic. I understand, I said, and I did. I understood exactly who these people were and how they saw me. After I hung up, I sat in my office, the office in the Riverside Manor building, overlooking the gardens I'd planted with my own hands, and I made a decision. I would let them have their day exactly as they'd planned it. I would arrive as instructed, enter where they told me to enter, sit where they told me to sit. I would be the modest, peripheral mother of the groom who knew her place. But I would also make sure that at some point during that wedding, the truth would come out. Not in a vindictive way, not in a way that would ruin Christopher's day, but in a way that would teach these people a lesson about assumptions, about judging others, about mistaking quiet dignity for weakness. I spent the final 2 months before the wedding planning exactly how that truth would emerge. I'm a strategic thinker. It's why I've been successful in business. I don't act impulsively. I calculate, I plan, I execute. This would be no different. The wedding day arrived on a Saturday in June. Perfect weather, sunny and warm with a light breeze. I'd been up since dawn, not because I was getting ready, but because I'd walked through Riverside Manor one final time, checking every detail. The gardens were pristine. The ballroom was perfect. My staff was prepared. Everything was exactly as it should be. I dressed carefully, a simple but elegant dress in dove grey, nothing flashy, nothing that would outshine the bride. I wore minimal jewelry, understated makeup. I looked like exactly what Patricia Ashford wanted me to look like, a modest, unimportant woman who knew her place. I arrived at Riverside Manor at 3 o'clock, an hour before the ceremony. As instructed, I parked in the guest lot rather than my usual spot behind the building. I walked toward the main entrance, my heart pounding, my hands steady. That's when I saw him. A security guard I didn't recognize, probably hired for the day, standing at the main entrance. He watched me approach, his eyes scanning me from head to toe, and I saw the exact moment he dismissed me. Guest entrance is around front, he said, gesturing vaguely. This is the main entrance. I am a guest, I said calmly. I'm the mother of the groom. He looked skeptical. Right. Well, I have instructions that VIP guests use the main entrance. Regular guests need to go around front. Regular guests. He just categorized me as regular, as someone who didn't merit the VIP designation. I wondered who'd given him that instruction. Patricia? Victoria? My own son? I'd like to enter here, please, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm going to need you to follow the instructions I've been given. His tone was getting firmer, less polite. The front entrance is that way. And I'm telling you, I'm Christopher Mitchell's mother. I'm immediate family. I should be entering through the main entrance. Look, lady, he caught himself, modified his tone. I don't make the rules. I have a list of people who are allowed through this entrance, and you're not on it. Now I'm trying to be nice here, but if you don't move along, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property entirely. Something in his tone, the threat of being asked to leave, made my blood freeze and then boil. This was my property. Mine. I'd restored every inch of it with my own hands. And I was being threatened with removal by a security guard who'd been hired for the day. I see, I said quietly. And where, exactly, Would you suggest I go? He pointed around the side of the building. Service entrance is that way. Since you insist you're part of the wedding party, you can check in with the catering staff. They'll get you sorted out. The service entrance. He was directing me to the service entrance, the door I'd specifically had installed for deliveries and staff access. I was being treated like help. If you've ever felt the moment when disrespect crosses a line from which there's no return, you know what I felt then. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. A clarity that cuts through all the noise and shows you exactly what needs to be done. Thank you, I said. That's very helpful. I walked away from the guard, away from the main entrance. But I didn't go to the service entrance, and I didn't go around to the front guest entrance. Instead, I walked to the side entrance that led directly to my private office, an entrance only my staff and I used, an entrance this rent-a-cop didn't even know existed. I let myself in with my key, walked through the corridor I'd designed myself, past the photos on the wall documenting the restoration of this property. 23 years of my life lived in those photos. The before pictures showing decay and ruin. The during pictures showing me in work clothes, covered in dust, younger and harder. The after pictures showing what vision and stubbornness could create. Margaret was in the main office, checking last-minute details on her tablet. She looked up when I entered, and her eyes went wide. Mrs. Mitchell. I thought you were coming as a guest today. Is everything? Everything's fine, Margaret. I kept my voice calm. I need you to do something for me. Of course. That security guard at the main entrance. The one who doesn't know who I am. Keep him there. Don't tell him anything. In fact, don't tell anyone on the Ashford side who owns this property. Not yet. Margaret's expression shifted to understanding. She'd worked for me for 12 years. She knew how I operated. What are you planning? Nothing that will ruin my son's wedding, I assured her. But I think it's time for some truths to come to light. On my timeline. Mrs. Mitchell. Margaret hesitated. Are you sure? This is Christopher's day. And he's my son. I've spent his entire life building something for him, and he doesn't even know what it is. Maybe it's time he learned. I moved to the window that overlooked the gardens, where white chairs were arranged in perfect rows, where my son would soon marry a woman whose family had spent months making me feel small. How many guests are expected? 243 confirmed. And the Ashford side versus Christopher's side? About 200 from the Ashford side. 43 from Christopher's. The numbers told their own story. My son had so few people in his corner, and most of his guest list was friends from college. People from Victoria's world, really. The few relatives from my side were outnumbered 5 to 1. And where am I seated? I asked, though I already knew. Margaret pulled up the seating chart on her tablet. Third row, I'll seat. Mrs. Ashford's instructions were very specific. The first 2 rows are reserved for immediate and important family, her words. I wasn't immediate or important enough to sit in the first 2 rows at my own son's wedding. At my own venue. Perfect, I said, and Margaret looked confused by my smile. That's absolutely perfect. I freshened up in my private bathroom, checked my appearance one more time. The woman in the mirror looked calm, composed, unremarkable. Good. Let them think I was unremarkable. Let them think I was someone who could be dismissed, redirected to service entrances, seated in the 3rd row. Mrs. Mitchell, Margaret said as I prepared to leave the office, when do you want me to clarify things? You'll know when, I said. Trust me, Margaret. You'll know exactly when. I left through a different exit, one that brought me out near the gardens, away from the main entrance and that security guard. I walked around to the front guest entrance like a regular person, like someone who didn't own every blade of grass beneath my feet. The front entrance was chaos, a crush of guests in expensive clothes, laughter and greetings, the excitement that precedes a big wedding. I slipped through unnoticed, just another middle-aged woman in a grey dress, nothing special, nothing remarkable. An usher, a young man in his 20s, probably one of Christopher's fraternity brothers, stopped me with a professional smile. Bride or groom? Groom. I'm his mother. Something flickered across his face. Surprise. Maybe. Oh. Mrs. Mitchell. Of course. Right this way. He led me down the aisle, and I could feel eyes on me. Not many, Most guests were still arriving, still chatting. But a few. I saw them registering me, this woman who was apparently important enough to be the groom's mother but not important enough to have entered through the main entrance with the other VIPs. The usher stopped at the third row. "Here you are, "Thank you," I said, and I sat down in my assigned seat, in the third row of my own ballroom, and I waited. Guests continued to arrive. I watched Victoria's family take their seats in the first 2 rows, an endless parade of Ashfords and their connections. They air-kissed and chatted, comfortable in their world, secure in their importance. Patricia Ashford held court in the front row, resplendent in champagne silk, greeting guests like a queen receiving subjects. She never once looked back at me. Christopher's small contingent of guests filled in around me, a few aunts and uncles I barely knew anymore, some friends from his childhood who'd stayed in touch, his former roommate from Cornell. They were dwarfed by the Ashford contingent, visually and numerically. 20 minutes before the ceremony, Richard Ashford himself arrived, the real estate mogul whose developments had made him a household name. He was tall, silver-haired, commanding. The kind of man who'd never been told no in his entire life. He strode down the aisle greeting people, shaking hands, playing the magnanimous father of the bride. When he passed my row, his eyes slid over me without recognition, without interest. I wondered if he knew my name in the industry. Probably not. Men like Richard Ashford didn't pay attention to smaller players, especially not women who'd built their portfolios property by property instead of through flashy developments and media coverage. I was beneath his notice. For now. The ceremony began right on time. The procession started, bridesmaids in blush pink, groomsmen in sharp tuxedos. Then Christopher appeared at the front of the aisle, and my breath caught. My son. My beautiful son, who'd grown from that red-faced baby into this man in a tuxedo, standing at the altar waiting for his bride. He looked nervous, excited, happy. He scanned the crowd, and when his eyes found me in the third row, he smiled. A genuine smile, full of love. Whatever else had happened, whatever distance had grown between us, he was still my son and he loved me. I smiled back, and for a moment, the hurt eased. Then the music changed and Victoria appeared at the back of the aisle. She was beautiful, objectively beautiful, a vision in white silk and lace, her dress probably costing more than most people's cars. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and every eye in the room was on her. Except mine. I was watching Christopher's face, watching him watch her, and I saw something that made my heart sink. Adoration. Yes. Love. Probably. But also something else. A kind of desperate gratitude, like he couldn't quite believe his luck, like he was afraid she might change her mind. He looked at her the way I'd once looked at Robert's parents, hoping for approval, hoping to be found worthy. The ceremony was beautiful and impersonal, elegant words about love and commitment spoken by a minister who clearly didn't know Christopher or Victoria well. The vows were traditional, safe, the kind you'd find in any wedding guide. Nothing personal, nothing that spoke to who they really were as people. Just performance, just ritual. They were pronounced husband and wife. They kissed. The guests applauded. And just like that, my son belonged to the Ashford family now, absorbed into their world, their traditions, their expectations. The recessional happened, the wedding party swept back down the aisle. Christopher and Victoria, radiant. The bridesmaids and groomsmen. Patricia and Richard Ashford, beaming like they'd just acquired a valuable asset, which, in a way, they had. My son was presentable, educated, working in finance. He'd do well in their world, once they'd fully mold him. I stood with everyone else, ready to follow the crowd to cocktail hour in the gardens. But as I stepped into the aisle, a hand touched my shoulder. It was Patricia Ashford. Up close, I could see the expert makeup, the subtle work she'd had done around her eyes, the diamonds at her throat that probably cost more than my first 3 properties combined. She smiled at me, that practice smile I'd seen on Victoria. "Dorothy. So glad you could make it." She said it like I'd come from across the country, like attending my own son's wedding was some kind of favor I'd granted. "You look nice. Very appropriate." Appropriate. That word again. "Thank you, Patricia. It's a beautiful ceremony." "Yes, well, we spared no expense. Only the best for our Victoria. This venue, for instance, do you know how difficult it was to book? They're reserved years in advance. But when you have the right connections." She smiled knowingly. "Richard knows the owner, called in a favor. Otherwise, we never would have gotten the date we wanted. Richard knew the owner. Called in a favor. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. How fortunate, I said evenly. Indeed. Now, dear, I wanted to catch you before cocktail hour to clarify a few things. The photographer will be taking family photos after the cocktail hour, and we've worked out a specific schedule. The Ashford family photos will be first, naturally, since there are more of us. Then combined family photos. You'll be called when it's time for your portion. My portion, I repeated. Yes. We thought perhaps 2 or 3 photos with you and Christopher, something for him to have. Then you'll be free to enjoy the reception. She patted my arm, a gesture that might have seemed maternal if it hadn't been so condescending. We know this must be a bit overwhelming for you, such a large, formal affair. Just relax and enjoy yourself. The staff here is excellent, they'll make sure you're taken care of. The staff here is excellent. She had no idea she was complimenting my hiring choices, my training, my standards. I'm sure they will, I said. Patricia moved on, swept up in the crowd heading to cocktail hour. I followed slowly, watching the guests spill out into the gardens I'd designed, drinking champagne I'd had to approve from my wine vendor, eating hors d'oeuvres from my kitchen, served by my staff. The gardens looked perfect. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold. The Hudson River sparkled in the distance. Guests clustered in groups, laughing, drinking, celebrating. This was the kind of event Riverside Manor was known for, elegant, flawless, expensive. I took a glass of champagne from a passing server, Lewis, who'd worked for me for 5 years. His eyes widened slightly when he recognized me, but I shook my head subtly. Not yet. He moved on without saying anything. I found a quiet spot near the rose bushes and watched. I watched Patricia hold court, surrounded by admirers. I watched Richard networking, even at his daughter's wedding. I watched Victoria and Christopher move through the crowd, perfect and radiant. I watched guests admiring the venue, complimenting the Ashfords on their exquisite taste. Stunning, isn't it? A woman near me said to her companion. The Ashfords really know how to throw an event. Patricia told me they practically took over the planning, her friend replied. She said the venue wanted to do everything by some standard package, but Patricia insisted on customizing every detail. She has such vision. My vision. My standards. My staff's execution. But Patricia was getting the credit. An announcement was made that dinner would be served soon, and guests should make their way to the ballroom. I followed the crowd back inside, into the room I'd restored, under the chandelier I'd rewired, past the French doors I'd refinished. The ballroom had been transformed for the reception. Round tables dressed in ivory linens, centerpieces of white roses and hydrangeas, soft lighting that made everything look like a fairy tale. My events team had outdone themselves. I found my table assignment, not at one of the front tables near the head table, but toward the middle of the room. Table 12. I was seated with some of Christopher's distant relatives and a couple I didn't know. Not with anyone important. Not anywhere that mattered. The woman next to me introduced herself as someone's aunt from somewhere. I honestly didn't catch it all. She was pleasant enough, asked polite questions about how I knew the couple. I gave vague answers, let her do most of the talking. The reception began with all the traditional elements. The grand entrance of the wedding party, whooping groomsmen and giggling bridesmaids. Christopher and Victoria entering to applause and cheers. The first dance, a slow song, professionally choreographed, probably took lessons for months. Victoria's dance with her father, Richard's face full of pride and something possessive, like he was showing off his greatest creation. Then, finally, Christopher's dance with me. A server came to get me, led me to the dance floor where Christopher was waiting. Up close, I could see the happiness in his face, but also the exhaustion. Being absorbed into the Ashford family was hard work. "Hi, Mom," he said, taking my hands. "Hi, baby." I hadn't called him that in years, but it slipped out. We danced to some generic mother-son song. I didn't even register what it was. All I could focus on was my son's face, so close to mine, this person I'd made and raised and loved and apparently failed to really know. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know this is probably all a bit much. It's your wedding, Christopher. Of course I'm here. Victoria's family, they have strong opinions about things. How things should be done. I hope you haven't felt." He trailed off, not wanting to name it. I'm fine, I assured him. I just want you to be happy. I am, he said, but there was something in his voice, uncertainty, maybe, or the fear that happiness could be taken away. Victoria's amazing. Her family has been so welcoming. They've already offered to help me with career connections, introduce me to the right people. This could really be the start of something big for us. Us. But he meant him and Victoria, not him and me. I was no longer part of the us in my son's life. The song ended. Christopher hugged me, kissed my cheek, and then was pulled away by someone needing his attention. A groomsman, another photo, something. I returned to table 12 alone. Dinner was served, a 6-course meal that Patricia had insisted on, overruling my chef's suggestions. It was good, technically perfect, but joyless somehow. Course after course of expensive ingredients assembled into beautiful presentations that tasted like obligation. Speeches began after dinner. Richard Ashford went first, telling charming stories about Victoria's childhood, her accomplishments, her bright future. He welcomed Christopher into the family with the kind of magnanimity that made it clear Christopher should be grateful for the privilege. The guests laughed and applauded at all the right moments. The best man's speech was full of inside jokes from Christopher's fraternity days. The maid of honor's speech was about Victoria's perfection. No one mentioned me. Not once. The mother of the groom apparently didn't warrant a mention in the narrative of Christopher's life. Then Patricia stood to give a speech. I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate this beautiful union, she began. Richard and I are thrilled to welcome Christopher into our family. We know Victoria has chosen well. Christopher is educated, ambitious, and he comes from humble beginnings. He understands the value of hard work, which is so important. We're confident he'll be a wonderful addition to the Ashford family legacy. Humble beginnings. She made it sound like Christopher had been raised in poverty, like I'd given him nothing. The people at my table shifted uncomfortably. They knew I'd paid for Christopher's Ivy League education, knew I'd given him every advantage. Patricia continued, and I must thank the staff here at Riverside Manor for executing our vision so beautifully. Finding the perfect venue is always a challenge, but when Richard called in that favor from the owner, we knew we'd found exactly what we wanted. Every detail has been perfect. Richard called in that favor from the owner. She was still telling that lie, still claiming credit for access to my property through her husband's connections. Something in me shifted. Not anger. I was past anger. This was clarity. Cold, absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. I caught Margaret's eye across the room. She was standing near the back, overseeing the staff, making sure everything ran smoothly. I gave her the slightest nod. She understood. Margaret moved through the ballroom with the efficient grace of someone who'd managed hundreds of events. She stopped to whisper something to Lewis, who nodded and disappeared through the door to the kitchen. She spoke to another staff member, then another. I watched my team mobilize, watched them prepare for what came next, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. Patricia had finished her speech and was basking in the applause. She'd successfully positioned herself as the architect of this perfect day, the woman whose vision and connections had made it all possible. The guests at table 12 were murmuring about how lovely everything was, how Patricia clearly had exquisite taste. Must have cost a fortune, the aunt from somewhere said to her companion. But when you have Ashford money, I suppose nothing's too extravagant. I sipped my champagne and said nothing. The DJ announced the cake cutting, and everyone's attention shifted to the elaborate 5-tier creation being wheeled out. White fondant with sugar flowers, elegant and tasteless, exactly like everything else about this wedding. Christopher and Victoria performed the ritual cutting, feeding each other bites of cake with manufactured playfulness for the cameras. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from Margaret, "Ready when you are." I typed back, "After cake. During open dancing. Make it natural." The response came immediately, "Understood." The cake was served, dry vanilla with bland buttercream, despite my pastry chef's offer to create something memorable. Patricia had insisted on using her own baker, someone who understood sophisticated palates. I ate my slice mechanically, tasting nothing. Open dancing began. The DJ played something current and loud, and younger guests flooded the dance floor. Older guests remained at tables, drinking and talking. The ballroom had that happy chaos that all good wedding receptions have: movement and music and laughter, guards lowered by alcohol and celebration. Perfect timing. Margaret appeared at my table, leaning down to speak quietly in my ear. "Mrs. Mitchell, could you come with me for a moment? There's a small matter that needs your attention." I nodded and stood, following her toward the back of the ballroom. A few people at my table watched curiously, but most were absorbed in their own conversations. We slipped through the door to the service corridor, the noise of the reception fading as the heavy door closed behind us. "Everything's set," Margaret said. "How do you want to do this?" "Start with the security guard. Bring him to my office. I want to talk to him first. And then we'll see how it unfolds. Trust me, Margaret. Once that first domino falls, the rest will take care of themselves." Margaret disappeared, and I waited in my office, standing by the window that overlooked the river. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and pink. In a few hours, this day would be over. Christopher would leave with his new wife, begin his new life fully absorbed into the Ashford world. And I would go home alone to the house I'd bought with my first real estate profit, the house Christopher grew up in but barely remembered. Unless something changed. Unless someone shook the foundations of all these assumptions the Ashfords had made. A knock at my office door. Margaret entered with the security guard trailing behind her, looking confused and slightly worried. Up close, he was younger than I'd thought, mid-20s maybe, probably working multiple event security jobs to pay rent. This is Derek Patterson, the security supervisor for today's event." Derek looked between us, uncertain. "Is there a problem? Did someone complain about something?" "No complaints," I said evenly. "I just wanted to clarify something. This afternoon, when I arrived at the main entrance, you redirected me. Do you remember?" Recognition and defensiveness flashed across his face. "Yeah, I remember. You weren't on the VIP list. I was following my instructions." "What exactly were your instructions?" He pulled out a crumpled paper from his pocket, smoothed it out. "I got this list from Mrs. Ashford's assistant. VIP guests who should use the main entrance versus regular guests who should use the front entrance. Your name wasn't on the VIP list." "But you also suggested I use the service entrance," I said. "Why?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, you were being insistent, and I thought, you said you were family, so I figured you could get sorted out with the catering people or whatever. I was just trying to de-escalate the situation." "You were trying to get rid of me." "I was trying to do my job." His tone was getting defensive. "Is this about making a complaint? Because I followed protocol exactly as..." "Derek," I interrupted gently, "do you know who owns Riverside Manor?" He blinked. Some company I think. We get hired through an events staffing agency. I don't really know the ownership details." "I own it," I said simply. "I've owned it for 23 years. I restored this property from a near ruin. I built this business from nothing. And this afternoon, at my own property, you directed me to the service entrance." The color drained from Derek's face. "Oh my God. I didn't, nobody told me, I was just following the list that Mrs. Ashford..." "I know," I said. "You were following instructions. The problem isn't you, Derek. The problem is that Mrs. Ashford made a list that categorized me as less important than her guests, and you had no reason to question it. The problem is a system of assumptions about who matters and who doesn't." "I am so sorry." Derek looked like he might be sick. I could have, should have, I don't know what to say. "It's fine," I assured him, and I meant it. Derek was just doing his job. The real issue was with the people who'd created that VIP list, who'd decided I didn't merit main entrance access at my own property. "I'm not angry with you. But I do need you to understand something. You made a judgment about me based on how I looked, how I presented myself. You assumed I was no one important. And that assumption led you to treat me with less respect than I deserved." "Yes, you're absolutely right. It won't happen again." "No, it won't. Because you're going to remember this moment the next time you're tempted to judge someone by appearances." I softened my tone. "Derek, you seem like a good person trying to do right. Learn from this. Everyone deserves basic respect, regardless of whether their name is on a VIP list." "I will. I promise." He looked genuinely chastened. "Is there anything I can do to make this right?" "Actually, there is," I said. "In about 15 minutes, there's going to be some confusion at this event. I need you and your team to stay calm and professional. Can you do that? Of course. Whatever you need. Margaret showed Derek out, then returned. That was generous of you, going easy on him. He's not the villain in this story, I said. He's just a kid following orders. The real issue is the people who gave those orders. I checked my watch. It's time. Let's do this. We walked back toward the ballroom, but instead of going inside, Margaret led me to the small alcove where the DJ was set up. The DJ, a professional in his 40s named Marcus who'd worked dozens of events for us, looked up as we approached. Mrs. Mitchell. Didn't expect to see you here tonight. Is this your son's wedding? It is. And Marcus, I need you to do something for me. Can you pause the music for a moment and hand me the microphone? There's something I need to say to the guests. Marcus glanced at Margaret, who nodded confirmation. Sure thing. Just give me a signal when you're ready. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment where everything would change. I thought about Christopher, about whether this would embarrass him, hurt him, damage his new marriage. But I also thought about all the small humiliations of the past months, all the dismissals and condescensions, all the assumptions that I didn't matter. And I thought about the lie Patricia had told, that Richard had called in a favor from the owner. That lie sitting in the air, unchallenged, becoming truth through repetition. I couldn't let it stand. I nodded to Marcus. He faded out the current song smoothly, then spoke into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment. Someone has a special message for the happy couple. The crowd quieted, attention shifting toward the DJ booth. I saw Christopher's face in the crowd, confused but smiling, probably thinking I was about to give some embarrassing mother of the groom speech. I saw Victoria next to him, her expression more wary. I saw Patricia at a nearby table, her face showing annoyance that someone was interrupting her perfectly choreographed event. Marcus handed me the microphone. The ballroom was silent except for a few confused murmurs. Good evening, everyone, I began, my voice steady and clear. For those who don't know me, my name is Dorothy Mitchell. I'm Christopher's mother. Polite applause, a few smiles. Christopher raised his champagne glass to me, still smiling. I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this beautiful union, I continued. Weddings are special occasions, moments when families come together, when love is celebrated, when we create memories that last a lifetime. I paused, scanning the crowd. I had everyone's attention now. I also want to say how beautiful this venue is. Riverside Manor really is special, isn't it? Murmurs of agreement, people looking around appreciatively. The gardens, the ballroom, the attention to detail, it all comes together to create something magical. Patricia was nodding, probably thinking I was about to compliment her taste in venues. I heard someone earlier say that the Ashfords were able to book this venue through connections, through Richard calling in a favor from the owner. And I want to address that, because it's important to me that everyone here understands something. Christopher's expression was shifting from confused to concerned. Victoria had gone very still. There was no favor, I said clearly. Richard didn't call anyone. He didn't need to. Because the owner of Riverside Manor is standing right here in front of you. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. I own Riverside Manor, I continued, my voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. I've owned it for 23 years. I bought it when it was a near ruin and restored it myself. I designed these gardens. I refinished the floors you're standing on. I hired the staff who've been serving you tonight. This business, every inch of it, is mine. The silence broke into chaos. Gasps, exclamations, people turning to each other in shock. I saw Patricia's face go white, then red. I saw Richard's expression shift from confusion to calculation to something like anger. I saw Victoria grab Christopher's arm, her perfect composure cracking. And I saw my son's face. Shock, absolute shock, like I'd just revealed I was someone else entirely. Which, in a way, I had. Mom. Christopher's voice carried across the room, strangled and disbelieving. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the truth, Christopher. The truth I should have told you months ago, but didn't. I own this venue. I've owned it since before you went to college. It's one of many properties I own, part of a portfolio I've spent 40 years building. Patricia found her voice, shrill and accusatory. "This is absurd. Richard, tell her, you spoke to the owner. You arranged this booking." Richard was shaking his head slowly, his face dark. "I never spoke to anyone. Patricia, what the hell are you talking about? You told me you had connections here, that you'd handle the booking." Patricia was coming apart, her carefully maintained composure shattering. "I said no such thing. You handled all the venue arrangements. You told me it was booked." Richard turned to stare at me, reassessing. "You're telling me you've owned this property for 20 years. 23, I corrected. "And yes, I've owned it, managed it, built it into one of the premier event venues in the region. Your wife has been planning this wedding at my property, making demands of my staff, without ever knowing who I was." Margaret appeared at my side, holding a folder. I'd asked her to prepare this documentation, just in case anyone doubted. She handed me the folder, and I opened it to show the first page. "This is the deed," I said, holding it up. "Dorothy and Mitchell, owner of record. Would anyone like to verify it?" No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the collective breathing of 200 shocked guests. "Over the past months," I continued, my voice harder now, "I've been treated as an afterthought in my own son's wedding. I've been told where to sit, where to enter, when to have my photo taken. I've been categorized as less important than real family. I've been made to feel small and peripheral and unimportant." I looked directly at Patricia. "This afternoon, when I arrived at my own property, I was directed to the service entrance by a security guard following instructions from your assistant. I was told I wasn't on the VIP list. At my own venue. At my own son's wedding." Patricia made a choking sound. Victoria was crying, her perfect makeup running. Christopher looked like he'd been punched. "I didn't reveal who I was because I wanted to see how I'd be treated when you didn't know I had power," I said. "And I learned everything I needed to know. I learned that you judge people by appearances, by status, by your assumptions about what they're worth. I learned that kindness and respect are things you extend only to people you consider important." "Mrs. Mitchell," Richard began, but I held up a hand. "I'm not finished. I need to say this, and everyone here needs to hear it. Success isn't just about money or status. It's not about having your name on billboards or being invited to the right parties. Success is about building something real, something solid, something that lasts. I built this from nothing. No family money, no connections, no favors. Just hard work and vision and refusing to accept that I wasn't good enough." I turned to Christopher, and my voice softened. "Baby, I built all of this for you. So you'd have opportunities, so you'd never struggle the way I struggled. But somewhere along the way, I failed to show you what I'd actually built. I let you think I was just your mom who owned some properties, nothing special, nothing impressive. And you grew up believing that you needed to marry into a family like the Ashfords to really be someone." Tears were streaming down Christopher's face now. "Mom, I never thought." "You did, though. You've spent the past 2 years trying to fit into their world, trying to prove you're good enough for them. But Christopher, you've always been good enough. You came from strength. You came from someone who built an empire with her bare hands. You didn't need the Ashfords to give you worth. You already had it." The ballroom was absolutely silent now. Even the staff had stopped moving, frozen in place watching this unfold. "I don't regret staying quiet until now," I said. "Because it showed me who these people really are. It showed me that they value appearance over substance, status over character. And it showed me that my son has been absorbed into a family that will never truly accept him, because they'll always see him as coming from humble beginnings." I handed the microphone back to Marcus. "I've said what I needed to say. The reception can continue. Please, everyone, enjoy the rest of the evening. This is still a celebration, still a wedding. I just wanted to make sure the truth was clear." I walked away from the DJ booth, heading for the exit. Behind me, the ballroom erupted into chaos, voices raised, people talking over each other, the organized elegance of the event dissolving into confusion and shock. I made it halfway to the door before Christopher caught up with me. He grabbed my arm, spun me around, and his face was a mess of tears and confusion and anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. "Why did you let me think, all this time, I thought?" "You thought what, Christopher? That I was just some woman who got lucky in real estate? That I was embarrassing, not sophisticated enough for your new family. No. I never. But he stopped, because we both knew it was true. I'd seen it in the way he introduced me to his friends, the apologetic tone, the quick changes of subject when my work came up. He'd been ashamed of me. You needed to learn something, I said quietly. You needed to learn that worth isn't about status or connections. You needed to learn that the people who judge others by their bank accounts or their pedigree aren't worth impressing. And you needed to learn that your mother is stronger and more successful than you ever gave her credit for. I'm sorry, he whispered. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I should have asked, should have paid attention, should have valued me, I finished. Should have been curious about who I really was instead of accepting the surface version. Should have questioned why Victoria's family was so quick to put me in my place. Over Christopher's shoulder, I could see Victoria approaching, Patricia and Richard behind her. The bride had stopped crying, her face now a mask of cold fury. You ruined my wedding, Victoria said, her voice shaking. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and you turned it into a spectacle. How could you do this? I revealed the truth, I said evenly. If that ruined your wedding, perhaps you should examine why the truth is so damaging. You're bitter, Patricia spat, finding her voice. Bitter and jealous that your son married into a better family. So you created this little drama to make yourself feel important. A better family. I looked at each of them, Patricia with her fury, Richard with his calculating coldness, Victoria with her tears of wounded vanity. Better how? Better at spending money you inherited? Better at looking down on people who actually work for what they have? Better at lies and pretense? How dare you? Patricia's voice rose. We welcomed Christopher into our family, gave him opportunities. You tolerated him, I interrupted. You tolerated him because he was educated enough, polished enough, useful enough. But you never saw him as equal. You saw him as someone who should be grateful for the privilege of marrying your daughter. Richard stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. Mrs. Mitchell, I think you've said quite enough. This display is inappropriate, Anne. Inappropriate? I laughed, and it came out bitter. What's inappropriate is how your wife has spent months making me feel unwelcome at my own son's wedding. What's inappropriate is being directed to the service entrance at my own property. What's inappropriate is sitting in the third row while you filled the front with people who matter to you, as if I don't matter at all. You were trying to trap us, Victoria said, her voice cold now, tears dried. You let us book the venue knowing who you were, let us plan everything, just so you could humiliate us in front of everyone. What kind of person does that? The kind of person who wanted to see your true character, I said. And you've shown me exactly who you are. All of you. Christopher was still beside me, caught between his mother and his new wife, his expression tortured. Mom, please. Can we talk about this privately? Not here, not in front of everyone. Why? Because you're embarrassed. Because you're worried about what all these people will think. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the boy I'd raised, smart, kind, but so desperate for approval that he'd lost himself. Christopher, do you know what I see when I look at you right now? He shook his head, not trusting his voice. I see someone who's forgotten where he came from. Someone who's ashamed of his mother because she doesn't fit the image his new family wants to project. Someone who's chosen status over substance. My voice cracked slightly, and I see my failure. Because somewhere in giving you everything, I forgot to teach you the most important lesson, that real worth comes from what you build, not what you inherit. That's not fair, Christopher said weakly. I'm not ashamed of you. I love you. Do you? Because love isn't just a feeling, Christopher. It's action. It's standing up for the people you claim to love. It's questioning when they're treated poorly. It's defending them. I glanced at Victoria, Patricia, Richard. Did you ever defend me to them? When they put me in the third row, did you say anything? When they minimized my role in your life, did you correct them? When they treated me like I was less than, did you notice? The silence was my answer. Margaret appeared at my elbow, her voice quiet. Mrs. Mitchell, the guests are, there's a lot of confusion. Should we tell the DJ to resume the music? I said. Tell the staff to continue service as planned. This is still Christopher's wedding. The celebration should continue. Are you leaving? Christopher asked, panic in his voice. I looked at my son, this man I'd created, raised, loved, and apparently lost somewhere along the way to his pursuit of belonging in a world that would never truly accept him. What do you want me to do, Christopher? Stay and pretend everything's fine? Smile and take my seat in the third row and let everyone forget what just happened? He stopped, struggling. I want my mother at my wedding. I am at your wedding. I've been here all day. I've been here for months, actually, watching from a distance while your new family planned everything, controlled everything, erased me from the narrative of your life. The question is whether you want me here as I actually am, successful, strong, not ashamed of what I've built, or whether you want the version of me that's easier for them to accept. Victoria grabbed Christopher's arm. Christopher, we need to talk. Privately. Now. But Christopher shook her off gently, his eyes still on me. Mom, I know I've screwed up. I know I've let her family, I know I should have seen what was happening. But please don't leave. Please stay. Let me fix this. How are you going to fix it? I asked. What are you going to do differently? He opened his mouth, closed it. He didn't have an answer. Because fixing this would mean standing up to Victoria, to Patricia, to Richard. It would mean choosing me over them, choosing truth over the comfortable fiction they'd created. And I could see in his eyes that he wasn't ready to do that. Maybe he never would be. I thought so, I said softly. Christopher, I love you. I will always love you. But I can't watch you diminish yourself to fit into their world. And I can't pretend that what happened here tonight is acceptable. I started to walk away, but Patricia's voice stopped me. You know what I think? I think this is all about money. You're upset that we didn't ask you to contribute more to the wedding. You wanted to show off, to prove you're as wealthy as us. This whole performance is just about your ego. I turned back slowly. Patricia, I could have bought this entire wedding 10 times over without noticing the expense. I own this venue outright. No mortgage, no debt. I own 12 commercial properties in 3 states. My portfolio is worth more than your husband's last 2 developments combined. And I built it all myself, from nothing, while raising a child alone. So no, this isn't about money. This is about respect. Something you've never given me, and something I will no longer tolerate not having. Richard's expression shifted to something like respect, or at least recognition. He was a businessman, whatever his faults. He understood what I'd just revealed. You're serious. You actually built all that. I don't lie about business, Mr. Ashford. Unlike some people, I don't need to exaggerate or claim credit for things I didn't do. I looked pointedly at Patricia. I don't need to pretend my husband called in favors that never happened. Patricia's face went scarlet. You're twisting my words. You told multiple people that Richard arranged this booking through his connections. You've been taking credit for access to this venue since you booked it. But the truth is, you went through my events coordinator like any other client. You signed my contract, paid my deposit, followed my rules, even though you tried to change them. I paused. You were just another client, Patricia. Nothing special. No favors granted. And that reality is apparently unbearable to you. Christopher, are you going to let her talk to my mother this way? Victoria's voice was shrill, desperate. Christopher looked between us, his mother and his wife, and I saw the moment of choice. I saw him struggling, wanting to defend me but terrified of the consequences. Wanting to stand up for what was right but unable to risk his new family's approval. He said nothing. And in that silence, I had my answer. Goodbye, Christopher, I said quietly. I hope your marriage is everything you dreamed it would be. I hope Victoria's family gives you the acceptance you've been seeking. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for in their world. Mom, please don't go like this. But I was already walking away, my heels clicking on the floor I'd refinished, past the walls I'd restored, through the door I'd hung. My venue. My property. My empire. And I was leaving my son's wedding early, leaving him to his new family, leaving him to whatever life he'd chosen. Margaret caught up with me in the hallway. Mrs. Mitchell, are you all right? No, I said honestly, but I will be. What do you want us to do about the reception? Continue as planned. This is still Christopher's wedding. Let them have their celebration. Just. I paused. Make sure they pay their final balance in full. No family discount. They're just clients now. Understood. Margaret hesitated. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. They needed to know who you are. Maybe. Or maybe I just made everything worse. I looked back toward the ballroom, where music had resumed, where the reception was continuing despite the drama. I wanted Christopher to be proud of me. Instead, I think I've just pushed him further away. Or maybe you've given him something to think about. Maybe this is the wake-up call he needs. Maybe, I said, but I didn't believe it. Christopher had made his choice. He'd chosen Victoria's world over mine, their approval over my respect. That was his right. But it was also my right to stop diminishing myself to make them comfortable. I left through my private exit, the one the security guard didn't know existed, the one that led to my reserved parking spot. I drove home through the summer evening, alone with my thoughts and the sound of my own breathing. My house was empty and quiet. I'd lived here for 27 years, raised my son here, built my empire from this home office. Now it felt like a museum of someone else's life, photos on the walls of a smiling child who'd grown into a man I barely recognized, furniture I'd bought thinking I was building a home for a family that no longer existed. I poured myself a drink, expensive scotch, the kind I'd learned to appreciate after closing my first $1 million deal. I sat in my office, surrounded by the evidence of my success, awards, photos of properties, framed articles from business publications. Proof that I'd made something of myself, that I'd beaten the odds, that I'd become someone important. But my son didn't know me. Not really. And his wife's family had looked at me and seen someone beneath them, someone whose contributions didn't matter, someone who could be redirected to service entrances without consequence. I'd revealed the truth tonight. I'd shown them who I really was. And it had cost me, maybe more than I'd anticipated. Christopher had looked at me like I was a stranger. Victoria had looked at me with hatred. Patricia and Richard had looked at me with shock that would curdle into resentment. Had it been worth it? I didn't know. Not yet. Maybe I wouldn't know for a long time. My phone buzzed. A text from Christopher. Mom, please. Can we talk? Don't leave things like this. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond, wanted to bridge this gap, wanted to fix what felt broken between us. But another part of me, the part that had survived being dismissed by Robert's parents, that had built a business through sheer stubbornness, that had refused to accept that I wasn't good enough, that part knew I couldn't go back. I'd shown Christopher who I really was. Now he had to decide what to do with that information. I couldn't make that choice for him. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I pulled out a legal pad and started writing. I've always processed emotions through action, through planning, through strategy. And I had a lot to process. Tonight had been a revelation, not just for the Ashfords, but for me. I'd spent years building an empire, but I'd been hiding it, minimizing it, letting people underestimate me. Why? Because I was afraid of being seen as showing off? Afraid of making others uncomfortable? Afraid of owning my own success? No more. If there's one thing I'd learned tonight, it's that silence doesn't protect you. Humility doesn't earn respect from people determined to look down on you. Sometimes you have to claim your worth loudly, publicly, unapologetically. I started making a list. Things that would change. Ways I would stop hiding. 1. Update my business profiles to include my name prominently. 2. Accept that speaking invitation I'd turned down last month. 3. Stop deflecting when people ask about my success. 4. Demand the respect I've earned. And at the bottom of the list, I wrote, decide what relationship with Christopher looks like now. That was the hard part. The part one couldn't strategize my way through. My son was married now, absorbed into a family that didn't respect me. Every family gathering would be awkward. Every holiday would be tense. The future I'd imagined, grandchildren, Sunday dinners, being an involved mother and grandmother, all of that was in question now. I'd won the battle tonight. I'd revealed the truth, made my point, claimed my power. But I might have lost the war. And the war was my relationship with my only child. The phone buzzed again. Another text from Christopher. Victoria and I are leaving the reception. We need space. Her family is upset. I don't know what to do. I wish you hadn't done this. I wish you hadn't done this. Not, I wish they hadn't treated you poorly. Not, I wish I'd defended you. Just regret that I'd disrupted the comfortable fiction everyone had been living in. I finally responded, I love you, Christopher. But I couldn't let their lies stand. I hope someday you understand. No response came. I sat in my office until the early hours of the morning, drinking scotch and thinking about choices and consequences. About the cost of speaking truth. About whether being right was worth being alone. I didn't have answers to any of it. The morning after Christopher's wedding, I woke up on my office couch with a splitting headache and the taste of regret in my mouth. Sunlight streamed through the windows, harsh and unforgiving. For a moment, I couldn't remember why I felt so heavy, why there was a weight pressing on my chest making it hard to breathe. Then I remembered. My phone showed 17 missed calls, 10 from Christopher, 4 from numbers I didn't recognize, 3 from my sister Janet in Buffalo who I hadn't spoken to in 6 months. There were dozens of text messages I couldn't bring myself to open yet. I made coffee in my kitchen, the one I'd renovated 5 years ago with marble countertops and professional-grade appliances I barely used. The house felt oppressively quiet. Usually I loved the silence. It meant peace, control, space to think. Today it just felt empty. The doorbell rang at 9:30. Through the front window, I could see Christopher's car in my driveway. My stomach clenched. Part of me wanted to hide, to pretend I wasn't home. But I'd spent too many years hiding. If I was going to own my truth, I had to face the consequences. I opened the door. Christopher looked terrible. He was still wearing his tuxedo pants and wrinkled shirt, hair disheveled, eyes red from crying or not sleeping or both. Behind him, the morning was beautiful. Blue sky, birds singing, the kind of perfect June day that belonged in a postcard. The contrast felt cruel. Can I come in? His voice was rough, damaged. I stepped aside. We went to the living room, where I'd hosted his birthday parties, where he'd opened Christmas presents, where I'd taken photos before prom. The furniture was the same, but we were different people now. Christopher sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I took the chair across from him, maintaining distance. Victoria's staying at her parents' house, he said finally. She left the hotel last night. She's really angry, Mom. Her whole family is furious. I imagine they are. Her mother is threatening to sue you. For, I don't even know what. Defamation? Emotional distress? Her father's lawyers are looking into whether you violated the venue contract by, I don't know, having a conflict of interest or something. He looked up, and his eyes were desperate. Mom, what were you thinking? Why did you do that? Why couldn't you have just told me privately? Would you have believed me if I'd told you privately? I asked. Would you have actually understood what I was trying to say, or would you have just tried to smooth things over, asked me to go along to get along? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Christopher, I've spent months watching Victoria's family treat me like I was nothing. Like I was an embarrassment, a problem to be managed, someone to be kept at arm's length and out of sight. And you let them. I didn't realize it was that bad. Because you didn't want to see it. Because it was easier not to. Because standing up for me would have meant confronting Victoria and her family, and you weren't willing to do that. That's not fair. His voice rose, defensive and wounded. I was trying to keep the peace. I was trying to make sure everyone got along. Do you know how hard it's been, trying to balance? Balance what? Your mother and your wife. Christopher, there shouldn't have needed to be balance. Your wife and her family should have treated me with basic respect. And when they didn't, you should have demanded it. That's what family does. You're not being fair, he repeated, and now there was anger in his voice. You're acting like I'm the villain here. But you're the one who made a spectacle at my wedding. You're the one who humiliated Victoria in front of 200 guests. You're the one who told the truth, I interrupted. I told the truth, Christopher. That's all I did. If the truth was humiliating, then maybe you should ask yourself why. He stood abruptly, pacing. You could have handled this differently. You could have talked to me privately, could have explained, could have given me a chance to make things right. Instead, you waited until the absolute worst possible moment to drop this bomb. What was I supposed to do with that information in the middle of my wedding reception? I gave you months to make things right, I said, my voice hardening. Every time Victoria's mother called with another instruction about where I should sit or when I should arrive or how I should dress. Every time they made a decision about your wedding without consulting me. Every time you told me about some new rule they'd imposed. Those were all moments when you could have stood up for me. You didn't. Because I didn't know. He whirled to face me, his expression anguished. I didn't know you owned the venue. I didn't know how successful you really were. You never told me. You never asked. The words hung in the air between us, simple and devastating. You never asked about my work, I continued, gentler now. Not really. Not beyond surface pleasantries. You knew I owned properties, knew I was comfortable financially, but you never wanted details. You were embarrassed by the whole thing. Your mother the landlord, collecting rent, dealing with contractors. It wasn't sophisticated enough for the world you wanted to enter. That's not. But he stopped, because we both knew it was true. I'd seen it in college, the way he'd deflect when his friends asked what I did. Oh, she's in real estate, said quickly, changing the subject. I'd seen it when he brought Victoria home that first time, the way he'd minimized my career. Mom has a few rental properties, as if my empire was a hobby, something quaint and small. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have paid more attention, should have asked more questions. You're right about that. But that doesn't justify what you did last night. Doesn't it? I leaned forward. Christopher, Patricia stood up in front of everyone and told a lie. She claimed your father-in-law had called in a favor to book my venue. She was taking credit for access that she earned through nothing but money and a booking agent. She was building a narrative where the Ashfords were the powerful ones, the connected ones, the important ones. And I was just a footnote, a minor character in their story. Was I supposed to let that stand? You could have corrected her privately. I'd been corrected privately for months. Privately told where to sit, where to enter, when to have my photo taken. Privately diminished and dismissed and treated like I didn't matter. Sometimes, Christopher, the truth needs to be public. Sometimes people need to be held accountable in front of the same audience they performed for. He sat back down, deflated. Victoria says she can't forgive you. Her mother says you owe them an apology. Her father says, he stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter what he says. They're all furious, and they want me to cut you off. To choose. My heart clenched. And what do you want? I want my mother and my wife to get along. I want to not be in the middle of this. I want. He trailed off, helpless. You want everything to be easy, I said. You want everyone to be happy, everyone to compromise, everyone to just get along. But Christopher, that's not how life works. Sometimes you have to choose. Sometimes you have to decide what's right, not what's easiest. So I'm supposed to choose you? Tell Victoria her family was wrong, demand they apologize to you, risk my marriage before it's even really started. I'm not telling you to choose anything, I said, and I meant it. This is your life, your marriage. You get to decide what it looks like. But I need you to understand something. I will not apologize for telling the truth. I will not apologize for owning my success. And I will not accept being treated as less than I am, not by Victoria's family and not by you. What does that mean? His voice was small, frightened. It means things are going to be different between us now. It means I'm done pretending to be smaller than I am to make other people comfortable. It means I expect respect from the people in my life, including my son. I paused, letting the words settle. It means if Victoria and her family can't treat me with basic dignity, then I won't be around them. And if you stay married to Victoria, which I hope you do, because marriage is important, then that might mean we don't see each other very often. You're giving me an ultimatum. No, I'm telling you the reality. I'm setting boundaries. Those are different things. Christopher put his head back in his hands. This is such a mess. This is such a fucking mess. I wanted to comfort him, to pull him into a hug like I had when he was little and the world felt too big. But he wasn't little anymore, and some lessons you have to learn without your mother's comfort. Victoria wants me to ask you for an apology, he said finally, not looking up. A public one. She wants you to admit you were wrong, that you handled things poorly, that you regret disrupting the wedding. And if I don't? Then she's not sure she can be around you. And she's not sure she wants me around you either. There it was. The choice, laid bare. His wife or his mother? The Ashford family or me? Christopher, look at me. He raised his head, and his eyes were wet. I love you more than anything in this world, I said. I have sacrificed and worked and built everything I have so you could have a better life than I did. But I will not sacrifice my dignity for your marriage. I will not apologize for telling the truth. And I will not accept your wife's ultimatums. So that's it. You're choosing your pride over your relationship with me. No, Christopher. I'm choosing self-respect. And I'm asking you to consider why your wife thinks she has the right to demand I humiliate myself as the price of having a relationship with my own son. He stood again, and I could see the walls going up, the defenses forming. I should go. Victoria's waiting for me at her parents' house. We have a lot to talk about. Of course. He walked to the door, then turned back. Mom, for what it's worth, part of me is proud. Proud of what you built, proud that you stood up for yourself. But another part of me is just sad. Because I think you might have destroyed any chance of us all being a family. We were never going to all be a family, I said gently. Not the way things were going. They were never going to accept me, Christopher. And I was tired of waiting for acceptance that would never come. He nodded slowly, then left. I watched through the window as he got in his car, sat there for a long moment with his head bowed, then drove away. Only after he was gone did I let myself cry. I called Margaret that afternoon. How bad was it after I left? Honestly, the reception continued, but the energy was weird. Lots of whispering, lots of people checking their phones. Patricia left early with Richard and Victoria. Christopher stayed until almost midnight, drinking at the bar, talking to his groomsmen. He looked devastated. Any damage to the property? None. Professional to the end. She paused. Mrs. Mitchell, I've gotten 3 calls this morning from clients asking to confirm you own the property. Word is spreading. Let it spread. I'm done hiding. There's also, well, there's been some chatter on social media. Someone posted video of your speech. It's getting a lot of attention. My stomach sank. What kind of attention? Mixed. Some people are calling you brave, saying you stood up for yourself. Others are saying you ruined your son's wedding, that you were vindictive and attention-seeking. The comments are intense. Of course they were. We lived in an age where everyone had an opinion, where private moments became public entertainment, where a wedding speech could be dissected by thousands of strangers. Send me the link, I said. I should see what I'm dealing with. The video was shot from someone's phone, shaky and poorly lit but clear enough. I watched myself on a stranger's screen, saw my face as I revealed the truth about the venue, saw the shock ripple through the crowd. The comments section was exactly as ugly as I'd expected. She humiliated them on their wedding day. Unforgivable. Good for her. They treated her like trash. This is the most petty revenge I've ever seen. She literally ruined their wedding. The bride's family sounds like entitled assholes. They deserved it. Imagine finding out your mother-in-law owns your wedding venue during the reception. I would die. She raised a son who was ashamed of her. She has every right to be angry. On and on, strangers weighing in, passing judgment, reducing a complicated family situation to entertainment. I closed the browser and poured myself another scotch. It was 2 in the afternoon. I didn't care. The next few days were surreal. My phone rang constantly, reporters asking for interviews, friends I hadn't spoken to in years calling to check in, even a producer from some reality TV show asking if I'd be interested in discussing my story on air. I ignored almost all of it. What I couldn't ignore were the business calls. 3 different companies reached out about potential acquisitions. 2 investors wanted to discuss partnership opportunities. Gerald Hoffman, my old mentor who'd retired 5 years ago, called to say he'd heard what happened and was proud of me for not backing down. You were always strong, Dorothy, he said in his gruff voice. But you were too quiet about it. You let people underestimate you. Good to see you finally claiming what you've earned. It might cost me my relationship with my son, I said. Might. Or might force him to grow up and see you clearly for the first time. Could go either way. Patricia Ashford's lawyers sent a threatening letter on day 3. Legal jargon about defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, breach of contract. My own lawyers responded with facts. Everything I'd said was true, provably true, and therefore not defamation. There was no breach of contract, the event proceeded as contracted, and they'd be receiving their photos and final invoice as promised. As for emotional distress, perhaps Patricia should have considered the emotional distress caused by months of subtle humiliations. The legal threats evaporated quickly. The Ashfords didn't want this in court, didn't want discovery, didn't want their own behavior examined under oath. They wanted me to disappear quietly. When that didn't happen, they moved to Plan B, social isolation. Christopher called a week after the wedding. Mom, Victoria, and I are back from our honeymoon. I hadn't even known they'd gone. Apparently they'd left 2 days after the wedding, cutting their planned 2-week trip to Hawaii down to 5 days. How was it? I asked. Tense. A pause. Victoria barely spoke to me the first 3 days. She's really hurt, Mom. She feels like you attacked her family. I defended myself from her family's dismissal. That's not the same thing. To her it is. Another pause. We need to talk about Thanksgiving. It was July. Thanksgiving was months away. But I understood. This was about drawing lines, establishing new rules for our relationship. Victoria's family does a big Thanksgiving every year at their place in Connecticut. We're expected to be there. And Victoria says she's not comfortable with you being there. After what happened. So I'm disinvited from Thanksgiving? In July. Mom, please don't make this harder. I'm trying to navigate this situation. No, Christopher. You're trying to appease your wife by excluding your mother. Those are different things. I kept my voice even, but anger was building. Let me make this simple for you. I won't go where I'm not welcome. If Victoria and her family don't want me at their Thanksgiving, that's their right. But you should think carefully about what you're agreeing to when you accept that. What am I supposed to do? Demand she invite you? Force everyone to be uncomfortable? You're supposed to recognize that a family that makes you choose between them and your mother isn't a healthy family. You're supposed to consider that maybe spending holidays with me, separate from them, is an option. You're supposed to act like my son instead of Victoria's husband. I am both. His voice rose, frustrated. Why can't I be both? Why do you have to make this an either-or situation? I didn't make it either-or. They did. I'm just refusing to accept being the person who's always diminished, always excluded, always made to feel less important than their family. We talked in circles for another 20 minutes, getting nowhere. Christopher was caught between competing loyalties and choosing the path of least resistance, which meant choosing Victoria's family over me. I understood it even as it hurt. New marriages were fragile. He didn't want to start his off with constant conflict. But understanding didn't make it ache less. As July turned to August, a new pattern emerged. Christopher would call once every 2 weeks or so, conversations that were polite but distant. He'd share surface details about his life. Work was good, Victoria was settling into her new role at her father's company, they'd bought a condo in the city. He'd ask surface questions about me. How was I? How was business? Had I taken any trips? We danced around the reality. Our relationship had been fundamentally damaged. The closeness, such as it was, had evaporated. We were mother and son in name but strangers in practice. I threw myself into work. I'd spent years building quietly. Now I built loudly. I accepted speaking engagements, gave interviews about women in commercial real estate, wrote articles about building wealth from nothing. If people were going to talk about me anyway, I'd control the narrative. And people did talk. The wedding video continued to circulate, spawning think pieces about class warfare, family dynamics, wedding etiquette. I was variously portrayed as a hero who stood up for herself and a villain who ruined her son's special day. The truth, as usual, was more complicated than any headline could capture. In September, Christopher called with news. Victoria was pregnant. We just found out last week. It's early, but, Mom, you're going to be a grandmother. I should have felt joy. I felt complicated knots of emotion I couldn't untangle, happiness for Christopher, anxiety about what this meant for our relationship, fear that I'd be excluded from my grandchild's life the way I'd been excluded from so much else. Congratulations, baby. That's wonderful news. We're not telling many people yet, but I wanted you to know. And Mom, I want you to be part of this baby's life. I know things have been weird between us, but this is a new start. A chance for all of us to move forward. Does Victoria know you're telling me? A pause. She knows. She's trying, Mom. She's willing to work on things if you are. Translation: Victoria was willing to tolerate me if I behaved appropriately, which meant accepting whatever terms the Ashford family set. Of course I want to be part of my grandchild's life, I said. But Christopher, we need to have honest conversations about what that looks like. I won't be kept at arm's length from my own grandchild. I won't be treated as a lesser grandmother than Victoria's mother. And I won't accept being excluded from important moments. I know, Mom. I promise. Things will be different. But I wasn't sure I believed him. Promises were easy. Actions were hard. And so far, Christopher's actions had consistently chosen his wife's comfort over my dignity. Still, a grandchild. A new life, a new generation, a new chance. Maybe Christopher was right. Maybe this could be a fresh start. Or maybe I was fooling myself. If you've ever been in my position, caught between loving your child and refusing to accept disrespect, then you know the impossible mathematics of it. Every decision feels like a loss. Every boundary you set feels like a wall you're building between yourself and the person you love most. Autumn arrived, and with it came the subtle shift in how people treated me. The wedding video had made me, if not famous exactly, then certainly notorious. I'd become a symbol, weaponized by people on both sides of debates I'd never intended to enter. Think pieces continued to appear: the mother-in-law's revenge, class warfare at a society wedding, and why Dorothy Mitchell was right to expose her son's elitist in-laws, and my personal favorite, 5 things we can learn from that viral wedding disaster. I'd become that woman from that video. Strangers recognized me in restaurants, at business meetings, at the grocery store. Some wanted to congratulate me. Others wanted to lecture me about what I should have done differently. Everyone had an opinion about my private family pain. I learned to smile politely and say nothing. What was there to say? The truth was complicated, but nobody wanted complicated. They wanted a clean narrative, villain or hero, right or wrong, justice or pettiness. I'll continue the story from exactly where you left off. In October, Victoria's first trimester nausea set in with a vengeance. Christopher called me from the hospital one evening, his voice tight with worry. She's been throwing up for 3 days straight. They're giving her 4 fluids. The doctor says it's hyperemesis gravidarum, severe morning sickness. They want to keep her overnight for observation. Is the baby okay? My first thought, always my first thought. Yeah, the baby's fine. It's Victoria they're worried about. She's lost 8 pounds. She can't keep anything down. He sounded exhausted, scared. Her mother's been here all day, but she had to leave for some charity board meeting. I'm here alone and I needed to tell someone. Do you want me to come? The words were out before I could stop them. Silence on the other end. Long enough that I knew the answer before he spoke. I don't think that's a good idea, Mom. Victoria's really stressed, and seeing you might just make things worse. There it was. My son's wife was in the hospital, frightened and sick, and my presence would make things worse. I was the stressor, the complication, the problem to be managed. I understand, I said, though I didn't. Give her my best. Tell her I hope she feels better soon. I will. And Mom? Thank you for not making this difficult. After we hung up, I sat in my office and stared at the wall. Thank you for not making this difficult. As if my wanting to support my pregnant daughter-in-law during a health scare was somehow making things difficult. As if my mere existence was an imposition on their lives. The next day, I sent flowers to the hospital. Nothing extravagant, just a simple arrangement with a card that read, "Wishing you a speedy recovery. Thinking of you and the baby." I signed it simply, Dorothy. Christopher texted me that evening. Victoria says thank you for the flowers. Not Victoria loved them, or Victoria was touched by the gesture. Just a perfunctory acknowledgement that I'd followed protocol. But at least it was something. Victoria's hyperemesis continued for weeks. She ended up hospitalized twice more. Each time, Christopher would call with updates, and each time, the subtext was clear. My physical presence was not wanted, not needed, not welcome. I learned to live with that particular form of rejection. I sent flowers, cards, care packages of things the pregnancy websites said might help with nausea. I received polite thank yous through Christopher, delivered like messages passed through a third party because direct communication between Victoria and me had apparently become impossible. In November, Christopher called about Thanksgiving again. So, we've been thinking. Victoria's still pretty sick, and a big family gathering sounds overwhelming for her. We're thinking of doing something small, just the two of us. I knew a lie when I heard one. Christopher, just tell me the truth. Are you having Thanksgiving with Victoria's family? A pause. Yeah. We are. But it's not, it's just that her mother's been so helpful with the pregnancy stuff, bringing her special foods and taking her to appointments when I have to work, and Victoria wants to be there. And with how sick she's been, I don't want to stress her out by pushing for something different. So I'm not invited. Mom, please. Don't make this a whole thing. It's just one Thanksgiving. We can do something together another time. When? Christmas? Or will that be too stressful for Victoria as well? New Year's? Easter? When, Christopher, will it not be too stressful for your wife to be in the same room as your mother? You're being unfair. She's pregnant and sick, and you know how things ended at the wedding. I know how things were at the wedding, I interrupted. I know that I was treated poorly, and when I refused to accept that treatment, I became the villain. And now I'm being punished indefinitely because I had the audacity to defend myself. Nobody's punishing you. We're just trying to get through a difficult pregnancy without added drama. I am not drama, Christopher. I am your mother. And the fact that you've redefined our relationship as a source of drama rather than a source of support tells me everything I need to know about where your priorities lie. We argued in circles, the same argument we'd been having in various forms since the wedding. Eventually, I told him to enjoy his Thanksgiving with the Ashfords and hung up. I spent Thanksgiving alone. I'd had invitations. My sister Janet had offered to have me up in Buffalo, and Gerald Hoffman had invited me to his family gathering. But I declined them all. If I was going to spend the holiday without my son, I wanted to sit with that reality, not paper over it with forced cheerfulness at someone else's table. I made myself a proper dinner anyway. Roasted chicken, stuffing, cranberry sauce, all the traditional foods. I set the table with my good china, poured myself expensive wine, and ate in my dining room like I was hosting a dinner party of one. It was both dignified and desperately sad. After dinner, I sat in my living room with my wine and looked at old photos. Christopher as a baby, fat and happy. Christopher at 5, missing his front teeth. Christopher at 10, holding up a fish he'd caught on one of our rare vacations. Christopher in his high school graduation gown. Christopher in his Cornell sweatshirt. All these moments I'd documented, this life I'd built for him. And now we were here, him having Thanksgiving with in-laws who treated me like I was beneath them, me alone in the house that had once been full of his laughter. My phone buzzed. A text from Christopher. Happy Thanksgiving, Mom. Love you. Just that. No invitation to video chat, no promise to visit soon, no acknowledgement that this was our first major holiday apart. Just a generic love you that felt like checking a box on a to-do list. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I poured more wine and continued looking through photos. Eventually, hours later, I texted back, Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you and Victoria are well. Polite. Distant. The same energy he'd given me. December brought the gender reveal. Victoria's pregnancy had progressed past the dangerous first trimester, and apparently the baby was healthy despite her persistent nausea. Christopher called me with the news before they announced it publicly. It's a boy, Mom. We're having a boy. A grandson. A little boy who might have Christopher's eyes or smile or laugh. A chance to be the grandmother I'd never had. My own grandmother had died before I was born, and Robert's mother had been cold and distant even with her grandchildren. Christopher, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you both. We're excited. Scared, but excited. We've started looking at names. He paused. Mom, I know things have been hard between us, but I really want you involved in this baby's life. I want him to know his grandmother. I want that too. More than anything. Then maybe we could start fresh? Maybe we could all have dinner together. You and me and Victoria. Just talk things through, clear the air. Hope bloomed in my chest, painful and bright. I'd like that. Okay. Good. Let me talk to Victoria, pick a date when she's feeling up to it. Maybe in a few weeks. The dinner was scheduled for mid-December, At a nice Italian restaurant equidistant between my house and their condo. Neutral territory. I spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear. Something nice but not showy, something that said I'm making an effort without seeming like I was trying too hard. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early and waited at the bar, nursing a glass of wine and trying to calm my nerves. This dinner felt important, like it could set the tone for whatever relationship I'd have with Victoria, and by extension, with my grandson. Christopher and Victoria arrived 10 minutes late. Victoria looked both beautiful and exhausted, her face fuller from pregnancy, her skin slightly sallow from months of nausea, but her clothes impeccable as always. She'd cut her hair shorter, a sleek bob that framed her face. Christopher's hand was protectively on her lower back as they approached. "Mom." Christopher leaned in to kiss my cheek, awkward and formal. "Hi, Christopher." I turned to Victoria. "Victoria. You look well. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you." Her smile was polite, practiced, showing no teeth. The nausea's finally starting to ease up. We were seated at a table in the back, away from other diners. The whole thing felt orchestrated, private enough for a difficult conversation, public enough that no one could make a scene. Smart planning. The first 10 minutes were excruciating small talk. The weather. Victoria's cravings. Christopher's work. The restaurant's menu. All of us dancing around the reason we were there. Finally, after our orders were taken and wine was poured, sparkling water for Victoria, Christopher cleared his throat. "So, I think we should talk about what happened at the wedding." Victoria's spine stiffened. I took a sip of my wine and waited. "I wanted this dinner so we could all start fresh," Christopher continued, looking between us. "What happened at the wedding it was difficult for everyone. But we're going to be a family now, with the baby coming, and I think we need to find a way to move forward." "I agree," I said carefully. "I'd like to move forward." "Good." Christopher looked relieved. "Victoria." Victoria set down her water glass precisely, her fingers pale against the stem. "I appreciate you saying that, Dorothy. But I think before we can move forward, we need to address what happened. You humiliated me and my family in front of everyone we know. You turned what should have been the happiest day of my life into a spectacle." Here we were, then. The confrontation I'd known was coming. "Victoria, I understand you felt humiliated. But from my perspective, I was responding to months of being treated as less than, culminating in your mother standing up and telling a lie about how your family got access to my venue." "My mother made a mistake," Victoria said, her voice tight. "She misunderstood some details about the booking. That doesn't justify what you did." It wasn't just about the lie. It was about everything leading up to that moment. The way I was directed to the service entrance at my own property. The way I was seated in the third row at my own son's wedding. The way every decision was made without my input, as if I didn't matter. "You could have said something earlier. You could have corrected my mother privately, could have talked to Christopher, could have." "I tried," I interrupted. "I expressed concerns to Christopher multiple times. I was dismissed, told not to make waves, told to just go along with your family's decisions." Christopher's face flushed. "Mom, that's not, I never told you to just go along with. You told me to keep the peace. You told me not to cause tension. You told me your future in-laws were stressed and I should be understanding. That's the same as telling me to accept whatever they decided." "This isn't productive," Victoria said, her voice rising slightly. "We're not here to rehash everything that went wrong. We're here to figure out how to move forward." "Then let's do that," I said. "But moving forward requires honesty about what happened and why. Your family treated me dismissively because they assumed I was unsophisticated, unimportant, beneath them. When I revealed that I actually owned the venue, that I'd built a successful business, that I wasn't who they assumed I was, that truth embarrassed them. But the embarrassment came from their own snobbery and assumptions, not from my revelation." "That's your interpretation," Victoria said coldly. "My parents' interpretation is that you deliberately deceived us, let us plan an entire wedding at your venue without revealing yourself, also you could have this big dramatic moment. They think you're manipulative and vindictive." "And what do you think?" Victoria hesitated, then met my eyes. "I think you're complicated. I think you were hurt and angry, and maybe you had some reasons to feel that way. But I also think you handled it in the worst possible way. You could have been the bigger person. You could have talked to us privately, given us a chance to make things right. Instead, you chose maximum impact, maximum humiliation. That makes me question your motives and your character. The words stung, even though I'd known something like them was coming. My character. Yes. Your character. Because someone with good character would have handled this differently. Someone who actually cared about their son's happiness would have found a way to resolve this without destroying his wedding. I did care about my son's happiness, I said, my voice hard now. I cared enough to spend 20 years building something substantial so he'd always be taken care of. I cared enough to pay for his education, to give him every advantage. I cared enough to watch in silence while your family marginalized me, because I didn't want to cause him stress. But there came a point where caring about his happiness meant I had to stop accepting my own disrespect. So your dignity was more important than his wedding. Victoria's eyes were bright with anger now, or maybe tears. You made a choice to prioritize your feelings over his special day. That's what happened. You can dress it up however you want, but that's the truth. I looked at Christopher, who was staring at the table, his jaw tight. Is that what you think? That I prioritized my feelings over your happiness? He didn't answer right away. When he finally looked up, his expression was anguished. I don't know, Mom. I understand why you were upset. I really do. But I can't get past the timing. You chose the middle of my wedding reception to drop this bomb. Why then? Why not the next day, or the week before, or any other time? Because the lie was being told then. Because your mother-in-law was taking credit for something she hadn't done, building a narrative that needed correction. Because I was tired of being erased from my own son's story. So yes, Victoria said triumphantly. Your feelings. Your need for validation. Your pride. All more important than Christopher's wedding day. That's not fair, Victoria, Christopher started. It's completely fair. Victoria turned to him, her voice breaking. She ruined our wedding, Christopher. Every memory of that day is tainted now. Every photo, every video. All I can think about is how your mother stood up in front of everyone and made it about her. Our first dance, our toasts, cutting the cake, all of it is overshadowed by what she did. She took our day and made it hers. She was crying now, and Christopher put his arm around her, shooting me a look that was part plea, part accusation. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said quietly. That wasn't my intention. What was your intention then? Victoria demanded. To punish us? To show off? To prove you were more successful than my family? What? To tell the truth, I said simply. That's all. Just to tell the truth about who I was and what I'd built, instead of letting lies and assumptions stand. Well, congratulations. You told the truth. And now we're all living with the consequences. Victoria stood abruptly. I can't do this. Christopher, I need to go. I need to leave. Victoria, please. Christopher stood with her, his hand on her arm. Let's just take a breath, okay? We came here to work things out. There's nothing to work out. Her voice was too loud now, drawing stares from nearby tables. Your mother isn't sorry. She doesn't think she did anything wrong. She's sitting there defending what she did, acting like she was completely justified. How are we supposed to move forward with that? I didn't say I wasn't sorry, I interjected. I said I was sorry you felt your wedding was ruined. That's different from being sorry I told the truth. See? Victoria gestured at me, her face flushed. She can't even give a real apology. Everything's qualified, everything's justified. I can't, I won't have my child around someone who thinks it's okay to behave this way. The words hit like a physical blow. My grandchild. She was threatening to keep my grandchild away from me. Victoria, that's not fair. Christopher's voice was strained. It's completely fair. I will not have our son grow up thinking it's acceptable to humiliate people, to prioritize your own feelings over everyone else's, to. She was crying harder now, her breath coming in gasps. Okay. Christopher wrapped his arm fully around her. Let's go. Come on. He looked at me over her head, his expression tortured. Mom, I'm sorry. I thought this would help, but we need to go. Christopher. I'll call you. I promise. But right now, I need to take care of my wife. His wife. Not Victoria. Not both of us. His wife. The delineation was clear. I watched them leave, Christopher guiding a sobbing Victoria through the restaurant, other diners staring, whispers following in their wake. Another scene, another spectacle. Except this time, I hadn't been the one to create it. Or had I? By refusing to give the apology Victoria wanted, by defending my actions, had I made this scene inevitable? I sat alone at the table, our untouched entrées arriving minutes later. The waiter, seeing only one person, looked confused. The others had to leave, I said. Can you box these up? Of course. I'm sorry. He hesitated. Is everything okay? No, I said honestly, but it will be. I wasn't sure I believed that, but it seemed like the right thing to say. I paid for the uneaten meal and drove home with 3 takeout boxes on the passenger seat, evidence of a dinner that was supposed to fix things and had instead broken them further. That night, I sat in my living room and let myself feel the full weight of what was happening. I was losing my son. Maybe not completely, maybe not forever, but losing him nonetheless to his wife's family, to their expectations, to their version of events that painted me as the villain. And now my grandson, a child I hadn't even met yet, was being used as leverage. The implicit threat Victoria had made was clear: apologize on our terms, accept our narrative, diminish yourself, or you won't be part of this child's life. It was the same pattern that had played out at the wedding, just with higher stakes. Submit or be excluded. Accept disrespect or lose access. Admit you were wrong even though you weren't, or face consequences. I couldn't do it. I couldn't apologize for telling the truth, couldn't pretend I'd been wrong to stand up for myself, couldn't accept that wanting basic respect made me the villain. But that meant accepting the consequences. And the consequences might be losing my relationship with Christopher and never knowing my grandson. The price of self-respect had never been higher. My phone rang near midnight. Christopher. Mom? I'm so sorry about tonight. Victoria was, she's been really emotional with the pregnancy hormones, and... Don't blame her hormones, Christopher. She said what she felt. And she's not wrong that I'm not sorry for what I did. A long silence. So what now? Where does that leave us? I don't know, I admitted. Where do you want it to leave us? I want my mother and my wife to get along. I want my son to know both his grandmothers. I want us to be a family. But Victoria's made it clear that can only happen on her terms. If I grovel, if I take full responsibility, if I admit I was completely wrong, then maybe she'll allow me access to my grandson. Those are her conditions. She's hurt, Mom. You have to understand. I do understand. But Christopher, being hurt doesn't give her the right to dictate whether I can have a relationship with your child. That's between you and me. You're his father. You have just as much say as she does. It's not that simple. I can't, I won't choose between you and her, Mom. I won't put my marriage at risk. And what about your relationship with me? Are you willing to put that at risk to keep Victoria happy? Another long silence. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Christopher. But we're here anyway, and we both have to make choices. You have to decide what kind of relationship you want with me, independent of what Victoria wants. And I have to decide what I'm willing to accept. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. I will always love you. But I won't beg for scraps of access to my own grandchild. I won't accept being treated as less than Patricia Ashford, who will undoubtedly be welcomed into every moment of that baby's life. Either I'm treated as an equal grandmother, or I'm not involved at all. Mom, you can't give me an ultimatum like that. It's not an ultimatum. It's a boundary. There's a difference. An ultimatum would be choose me or Victoria. A boundary is I require respect and equal treatment, and if that's not possible, I'll step back rather than accept less. So you'd step back? You'd just walk away from your grandson? The question hurt more than anything Victoria had said. I'd step back from a situation where I'm constantly diminished. Yes. Because I've learned that staying in situations where you're not valued only teaches people that your presence is worthless. I did that for too long in my marriage with your father. I won't do it with my grandson. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet. Think about it. Talk to Victoria. Figure out what kind of relationship is possible. But Christopher, I need you to understand something. I will not compete for the privilege of knowing my own grandchild. I will not accept being treated as lesser. And I will not apologize for standing up for myself. Those are my boundaries. You and Victoria need to decide if you can work within them. After we hung up, I walked through my empty house, past the photos of Christopher growing up, past the rooms I'd furnished thinking someday there might be grandchildren staying over, past the life I'd built that suddenly felt very hollow. I'd stood on principle. I'd refused to compromise my self-respect. I'd set healthy boundaries. And I might have lost everything that mattered in the process. The question I couldn't answer, the question that kept me awake until dawn, was I right? Or was I just stubborn? Was this courage or cowardice? Was I protecting myself or destroying my relationship with my son? I didn't know. And that uncertainty was the hardest thing of all. I've continued the story, maintaining the emotional depth and complexity you established. The narrative follows Dorothy through the painful aftermath of the wedding, showing how the conflict deepens despite attempts at reconciliation. The story explores the cost of standing on principle versus the human need for connection with loved ones, particularly as she faces potentially being excluded from her grandson's life.